Ayo, check this out. We have player housing updates. We now know how adding, moving, and resizing objects looks like, and the devs also gave us some insight on what is to come for player housing and how the system will shape up. And man, they really are taking this come back home to WoW thing seriously and literally. The concept of player housing feels so alien to me to the point that I still cannot believe they will do it, which makes this video all the more surreal to make. I'm not going to bore you. I want to talk about two main things. One is the actual updates that we know of until this point in time, and two, whether or not World of Warcraft needs player housing. I don't know if you are familiar with game design, 3D design, or graphical design of any kind, and honestly, I don't know if you even care. Not that you should, all that matters is that you play a good game that you paid money for. The rest is relative. But if you are a programmer, a graphical designer, or a 3D artist, you might appreciate this more because this is some good stuff considering WoW's almost 25-year-old engine. First off, there are two modes you can choose to customize your own home in: the basic version and the advanced version. Basic essentially takes physics and collision into consideration when moving this around and could be considered the realistic approach to moving and setting objects within the confines of your personal space. The objects you will be interacting with will have some movement controls that are set upon mathematical axes, and you can move them with snapping effects that make it easy to align with other objects. Snapping refers to a set of coordinates that are set, and when the object you move gets close to those coordinates, it snaps in that place so that it is easier to align and move objects around. When you rotate them, you can only rotate objects by 15 degrees increments, a bit more limited, but it makes it easier and drastically quicker to position tables in a room when you can align them with the chairs or sofas or even carpets. It helps with geometrical symmetry when making things look nice and organized. I mean, organized doesn't have to be your goal. You can make it look like Asmongold's room if you want. You can just do it faster and more efficient. An organized chaos, if you will. We can even see how easy it is to position windows on the wall and how moving it around makes it detect other objects and snaps to where it should realistically be on the wall. Actually, this is true for even more obvious objects like the table, being moved around on top of a carpet where it detects the carpet as an object and just snaps on top of it instead of through it. And this might actually be a big green flag if you ever use transmog on a character where the armor pieces clip into each other. The collision detection and snapping coordinates are there so this clipping doesn't happen when decorating your home. Something that should be obvious and logical, but harder to pull off in game design. Definitely hasn't happened in WoW on some of the more basic 3D models. This ease of design extends to groups of objects like, say, a table with books and stuff on top of it. In their article, Blizzard gave an example of a bookshelf, but this visual depiction works just as well. Certain objects detect when they have a parent object, which is the term they use to refer to an object they stick to, kind of like how gravity works. When you move the table, the objects on the table stay fixed on the actual surface of the table and essentially move with it. Now, you might be thinking that all of this sounds like how it should work, so what's the point in making this point? Well, I will do my best to try to answer on behalf of the devs, seeing as I am versed in 3D design because I did watch an episode of The Big Bang Theory. Programming, which stands at the basis of any kind of digital design, or anything digital really, is essentially you creating rules for a world that doesn't exist. There is no physics or logic in a program unless you tell it there is. So essentially you need to tell the book that when it occupies the space adjacent to the table, if the table moves, the book will move at the same rate, direction and speed with the table, so it maintains its position relative to the surface it considers to be attached to. This is important because when this does not happen, you have the clipping issue I pointed out earlier, when the tabard or a shoulder piece does not recognize the existence of the character model fully, so it phases through it on certain points, breaking the immersion of the three-dimensional world and making you uncomfortably upset in regards to your failed transmog. The reason I wanted to stress this point is that 100% you have played through the game at one point when your sword clipped into the ground as an Ohm warrior, or your tabard flutters through your plate armor, and so on. And the fact that these things are addressed more aggressively in the player housing not only makes it so the system is actually elegant, functional, and immersive, but also signifies that hopefully all future 3D designs, whether they be player housing, character armor, world texture interactions, will follow similar rules to the point where if they are actually applied 100% throughout the game, you could consider the graphical changes as WoW 2.0, because the leap in quality would be that big that you could think of it as the next version of World of Warcraft. These things will keep happening gradually and have been happening for a while, which is why, one, you haven't noticed the actual differences because it all didn't happen all at once, and two, we will never get WoW 2.0 since the current version of WoW could very well be it, or rather, if we will be completely honest, it might even be WoW 4.0 since 2.0 happened in MoP with the new character rigs for Pandaren, introducing a lot of new tech, animating faces, and giving all of the rigs drastically improved combat animations for monks. 3.0 could be considered WoD and Legion when the character models and new animations were implemented for the rest of the classes, and 4.0 kind of culminating in Dragonflight with dragon riding, giga improved textures for the open world, animations, and the new Evoker class that just introduced a new level of class spell effects, all of it continuing to this day, one class at a time, one patch at a time. By the way, we have a video about all of the graphical changes and evolution of WoW in the description, which you can check out after this one. Essentially, what this new player housing system tells us based on how it is implemented is that they are taking the WoW engine when it comes to how your character interacts with world objects to a new level, opening the gates for an even more realistic world. We will likely never have anything resembling the Unreal Engine versions of WoW people have cooked up over the years for different reasons, but that is not to say that the game isn't improving. And I only touched on the basic version of housing customization since the advanced is just bonkers. This mode of editing has no restrictions so far. So much so, I'm questioning if it can even be properly implemented. The snapping effect is taken away in favor of full control over the objects you interact with. No more physics and gravity, and definitely no more 15 degrees incrementing of rotating and positioning objects. If you ever wanted to make your house look like the Tower of Karazhan with objects floating around through the room, or literally through the room, you can do that. The mechanics of the editing furniture is centered around the gimbal system, where you use 3D controls on objects' position relative to the space they occupy by adjusting it on any axis you want. Packed with this, you can also smartly resize objects, and from what we can see in this showcase, the table that is being resized seems to be individually adjusted, where the objects on top of it retain their original size through the process. I would not be at all surprised if they implemented a feature where you can choose whether you resize the objects in batches or individually like this, as choices players can make. Outside of the details, which will 100% change and multiply over the development of player housing, let's actually talk about the freedom of customization on here. WoW is known by the current community for the restrictions it imposes on players through its systems and general game design, whether it is story gating, gear capping, or system lockouts that the devs consider necessary for the player experience. With housing, we are literally getting the reins cut off and let loose, so we can just do anything we want in our own little space here. A very mild example is one of the designs the working team did by taking bushes and styling them into garlands for the fireplace. How many objects will we even be able to have in our inventory to add and modify for our home? And who even will go outside? Well, we are already all day inside playing WoW. Now we will be double inside our WoW home. So houseception. Also, we can dye our furniture. This is a housing video, but I do want to talk about transmog here as well. First off, dyeing your bed to match the carpet or vice versa is cool. Changing the colors of the woodwork on the bed frame is even cooler. I mean, what? Do we get more, if not all, types of wood from the game as options to build our desired furniture? And secondly, how much of this system can bleed into transmogs, since transmogs are the closest thing to fully customizable player expression. We have been asking for dyes for armors and weapons for years. Now, if this ever becomes a thing for transmogs as well, it will elevate the character expression to a more modern age within WoW, despite how Herculean the tasks might be for the devs in charge of it all. But these changes, like I pointed out earlier, happen one step at a time, and we haven't even gone to the zones and neighborhoods yet. That is mostly because there is nothing to get at the moment. All we know from a previous post about housing is that Midnight, and by extension the housing, will be in allegedly new zones that resemble those of Elwyn Forest with, and I quote, touches of Westfall and Duskwood, while the Horde ones would be Durotar and Azshara inspired. This means that we might already have confirmed the new Azeroth-themed zones in Midnight that are not voidy, which would house the neighborhoods for the player housing. There's so much to talk about just that, actually, since the housing system initially implied revamps of old world zones that were already teased by Metzen at the 2023 BlizzCon, one of which being Quel'Thalas. That would of course make sense for a home belonging to the Blood Elves, and one would argue the only sense for a Blood Elf home, which we stress because let's not forget that my undead will not want to live in Durotar, just as much as how my Night Elf would not want to live in Westfall. But this is for another video, because everyone has their favorite zone, and we are so curious to know what everyone wants for their ideal zone to be when they make their inevitable home back in WoW. And if you still are not convinced that we already passed the point of WoW 2.0, you have to watch our video on the graphical update WoW has had over, I don't know, 2 decades, right here. Just click.